Behind the walls of a wealthy rural estate, an unimaginable tragedy unfolded, leaving 6 family members forever silenced. A chilling farm implement and an untouched bowl of scraps were the only clues left behind. What dark psychological torment pushed an obedient man towards such unthinkable retaliation? Please like and subscribe to join us on this case. This video contains chilling secrets. Viewer discretion is advised. On the afternoon of April 4th, 2001, Li Zhicheng walked toward the home of his fiancée, Zhu Chengshu. The Zhu residence sat in Linjiang Village, a remote mountain farming community in Hanyuan County, within the borders of Yan City, Sichuan Province. Upon arrival, he found the front gate slightly open. Familiar with the household, he pushed it wide and stepped inside. An eerie silence greeted him. He called out for his fiancée, but his voice merely bounced off the cold stone walls. No one answered. Moving deeper into the yard, his eyes caught a dark shape resting in the shadows. He stumbled backward, falling onto the hard dirt in pure terror. Lying motionless in the corner was his future father-in-law, Zhu Zhencheng. The older man was drenched in blood, his body mangled beyond recognition. Unable to process the gruesome scene, Li Ziqiang began screaming frantically. The sheer panic in his voice echoed across the quiet village, drawing nearby farmers who dropped their tools and rushed over to investigate. What the neighbors discovered was a waking nightmare. It was not just the patriarch who had met a violent end. Scattered from the outdoor courtyard into the living room and upstairs bedrooms were 6 brutally mutilated bodies. The victims were covered in dark crimson pools, spreading across the floors. The sight was so horrific that even the strongest young men in the village felt physically ill. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the villagers ran to the village chief's house, which held the only telephone in the area, and frantically dialed the authorities in Yan City. When dispatchers received the call, the details sounded so extreme, they repeatedly asked if there had been an exaggeration. But the caller's trembling voice painted a picture of an absolute massacre. Knowing they could not afford to waste a single second, the Yan City police mobilized a massive response team. Reaching the Zhu residence was incredibly difficult. Linjiang Village was nestled deep in rugged terrain, characterized by winding, treacherous dirt roads filled with rocks and steep drops. To make matters worse, a persistent drizzle had turned the mountain paths into thick, slippery mud. It took the police convoys nearly 2 hours of fighting through the treacherous conditions before they finally arrived. Despite orders to stay back, a crowd of terrified locals had gathered around the perimeter. As seasoned homicide detectives stepped past the police tape, even they gasped at the carnage. The walkthrough revealed a methodical, deeply personal rage. In the courtyard, the homeowner, Zhu Zhencheng, lay dead. His head had been completely severed from his neck. Detectives estimated he had been struck no less than 30 times with a heavy blade. Near his body sat a massive iron guillotine, a tool typically used by farmers to chop thick grass, heavily stained with fresh blood. Under the porch awning lay his wife, Li Zilian. She was positioned on her side, covered in overlapping defensive wounds, indicating a desperate struggle. Her face had been slashed relentlessly, leaving gaping lacerations, with additional severe cuts across her arms, legs, and abdomen. Inside the living room, investigators found the eldest daughter, Zhu Chengshu. Her death was equally agonizing. She had suffered at least 20 deep lacerations, and her head was nearly detached from her shoulders. Her limbs had also been severely mangled in the attack. The horror continued upstairs. In one bedroom, they found the second daughter, Zhu Mozhen. Her legs and shoulders had been hacked repeatedly, but the killer had focused terrifying violence on her face. Her mouth had been intentionally mutilated. Lying tragically close to her was her 5-month-old infant daughter, Zhu Li. The helpless baby's throat had been brutally slit. In another bedroom, police found the body of a 5-year-old boy named Luan Wei, the son of the eldest daughter from a previous marriage. He too had died from a single, exceptionally deep slash across his throat. Detectives immediately noted the house had not been ransacked. All money and valuables were untouched, instantly ruling out a robbery. Scattered around the property, forensic teams recovered discarded weapons, including a heavy wooden club, a Tibetan-style knife, a large farming machete, and the grass guillotine. Investigators also found distinct bloody footprints leading away from the carnage. Based on the shoe prints, they deduced the killer was a man of large build, standing approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall. Who held such a bottomless well of hatred for the Zhu family? Officers quickly learned the household consisted of 7 permanent residents. 6 lay dead inside. The only missing member was the live-in son-in-law, Lee Duan. Was he abducted, murdered elsewhere, or was he the phantom butcher? A squad raced to the nearby home of Lee Duan's biological parents. The elderly couple was visibly shaking, holding onto each other and weeping. They swore they had not seen their son. When pressed, the parents tearfully admitted their darkest fear. They suspected their son might be the killer. They revealed that Lee Duan had been treated like a slave by the Zhu family, constantly subjected to severe verbal abuse and physical beatings. A critical breakthrough quickly arrived. A neighbor named O approached detectives. He stated that early that morning, Lee Duan had stopped by to borrow a large farming machete, claiming he needed it to clear weeds and promising to return it by the afternoon. He never did. When investigators showed O the bloody machete recovered from the crime scene, he immediately identified it as his own. The bloody machete, the history of severe abuse, and his sudden disappearance painted a clear picture. Lee Duan was no victim. He was the prime suspect in one of the most brutal mass murders in provincial history. An urgent nationwide manhunt was immediately launched. With Lee Duan established as the primary suspect, law enforcement launched a massive manhunt. Warrants were issued nationwide, calling upon all citizens to report any sightings. The rugged, heavily forested mountains surrounding the crime scene provided the perfect natural cover for someone desperate to disappear. Knowing the terrain was too vast for the police alone, authorities mobilized local civilian militias to comb through the dense woods and treacherous ridges. The search parties swelled in numbers, sweeping the countryside day and night. Despite their relentless efforts, days turned into weeks with no sign of the killer. Investigators cast a wide net, staking out the homes of his parents, sister, and extended relatives. Undercover officers monitored provincial bus depots, local markets, railway stations, and roadside motels. Hoping to entice an informant, the police department announced a substantial cash reward for actionable intelligence. During extensive strategy sessions, detectives analyzed Lee Duan's background to predict his next move. Before becoming a live-in son-in-law, his only professional experience had been heavy labor in underground coal mines. The investigative team theorized that a fugitive on the run would inevitably run out of cash and need to survive. It was highly probable he would seek familiar, off-the-books employment. Acting on this theory, strike teams descended upon Garzay County, a region famous for its sprawling coal industry. Officers methodically raided and inspected a total of 70 different mining operations, from large commercial pits to illegal shafts. Yet, they found absolutely nothing. Just as frustration began to set in, a sudden tip reignited the investigation. An informant reported spotting a man closely resembling the wanted poster in Bazong Town, located within Ganluo County. The suspect had reportedly been staying at the home of a local resident named Liu Naibing. Heavily armed units immediately swarmed the property. However, they were too late. The homeowner admitted that Lee Duan had indeed stayed with him, but packed up and left on the 28th of the month. Liu frantically explained that he lived entirely off the grid and had no idea his house guest was the most wanted man in Sichuan province. Believing the killer could not have traveled far on foot, police set up blockades across all roads leading out of Ganluo County, hoping he would walk right into their trap. But the phantom killer slipped through their fingers once again, vanishing into thin air. 3 agonizing months passed since the massacre. The unresolved case hung heavy over Yan City, and the local press heavily criticized the police force for failing to capture a rural farmer. Refusing to wait for another cold lead, the department aggressively increased the bounty and expanded their search parameters. Their persistence finally paid off when a civilian named Lee Duan called the dispatch center, reporting that the fugitive was wandering near a rural sector of Ganluo County. Patrol cruisers immediately sped toward the designated area. As they navigated the narrow mountain highway, a large commercial Dongfeng transport truck passed them heading in the opposite direction. Unbeknownst to the officers, the mass murderer they had been hunting for months was hiding inside that very truck. Moments later, the police flagged down a smaller local vehicle. The frantic driver pointed down the road, shouting that the wanted criminal had just hitched a ride in the passing cargo transport. Swerving hard, the police cruiser spun around and initiated a high-speed pursuit. After a tense chase lasting a few miles, they managed to cut off the large truck, forcing it to a screeching halt. Officers leaped from their vehicles, weapons drawn, and surrounded the cab. Inside, Lee Duan surrendered quietly. There was no struggle, no denial, and no panic. He simply lowered his head, calmly confessing to the slaughter of 6 people. To understand how a quiet man could execute such a horrific crime, investigators had to look into his past. Born in 1975, Lee Duan was only 26 years old at the time of the murders. He grew up in an impoverished household where every day was a struggle for basic survival. As the eldest son, he made the difficult choice to drop out of school at a young age, sacrificing his own education so his younger siblings could afford to attend classes. His parents were honest farmers who instilled strict moral values in their children. Neighbors remembered Lee Duan as exceptionally polite and deeply compassionate. Once, as a teenager, he found a lost wallet stuffed with cash. Despite his family's desperate poverty, he never considered keeping it, spending hours tracking down the rightful owner to return every single bill. He was painfully aware of his family's financial burden and hated seeing them mocked for their poverty. By the age of 17, he was already working grueling manual labor jobs to pay for his siblings' tuition and his parents' mounting medical bills. Blessed with an incredibly strong physique, he eventually took a high-risk job in the dark, suffocating tunnels of a coal mine. Supervisors noted he routinely accomplished the workload of 2 grown men. Yet, no matter how hard he worked or how many hours he logged, the medical debts and living expenses drained his savings entirely. He never drank alcohol, never gambled, and never spent money on himself. He was the ultimate family provider. As he entered his 20s, his parents worried his extreme poverty would prevent him from ever finding a wife. Lee Duan accepted his lonely fate, preferring to stay single rather than risk a miserable marriage that might shame his family. However, a local matchmaker eventually intervened, presenting a highly unusual opportunity. She arranged a meeting with Zhu Mujin, the youngest daughter of the wealthy Zhu family from Lenjiang village. The Zhu patriarch was a formidable landowner. Because he lacked sons, he was aggressively seeking a strong young man, willing to become a live-in son-in-law to inherit the family labor. During their initial meeting, Zhu Mujin was drawn to Lee Duan. His years of grueling labor had built a broad, muscular physique that stood out among the village men. In return, Lee Duan found himself captivated by her clear complexion and bright features. However, Zhu Mujin was strictly business. She bypassed any traditional romance, laying out her terms with absolute clarity. She stated that if he found the arrangement agreeable, they should marry immediately without wasting time on dates. The non-negotiable condition was that he had to move into the Zhu household as a live-in son-in-law. In exchange, she promised he would not have to worry about living expenses, and if he worked hard to learn the family trade, The couple would eventually inherit her father's massive agricultural estate. For Lee Duan, the proposal seemed like a godsend. Moving out would instantly relieve the financial strain on his impoverished parents. Furthermore, living with the wealthy Zhu family offered the tantalizing possibility of earning a substantial income and securing a bright future for his future children. Convinced it was a perfect solution for everyone involved, he accepted. The wedding took place mere weeks after their very first introduction. In a rare show of supposed generosity, the Zhu family did not demand a traditional bride price from the groom. Furthermore, they covered the entirety of the wedding banquet costs, while the Lee family only made a modest financial contribution. But this facade of benevolence vanished the moment the ceremony concluded. From the very first day Lee Duan moved his meager belongings into their sprawling compound, he was blindsided by a radical shift in the family's demeanor. The patriarch, Zhu Jincheng, was notorious throughout the county, not only for his wealth but for his unparalleled greed. The initial kindness shown to his new son-in-law was nothing more than a calculated bait-and-switch. The patriarch had desperately needed a strong, capable farmhand, but refused to pay wages. By bringing Lee Duan into the family, he had essentially acquired indentured servitude. The mask slipped completely when Zhu Jincheng demanded that Lee Duan surrender his entire life savings. The patriarch claimed the money was required to reimburse the family for the wedding banquet and the bridal gifts, leaving the young man entirely destitute. With his savings gone, Lee Duan was reduced to the status of a peasant laborer on his own father-in-law's land. The wealthy family openly despised him for his impoverished roots. His daily existence became entirely conditional on his physical output. If he did not perform exhausting manual labor from dawn until dusk, he was forbidden from eating. While his wife and her family spent their days lounging around the house, admiring the gardens, and enjoying their wealth, Lee Duan was worked like a pack mule. He toiled relentlessly, but never saw a single penny of the profits he helped generate. His new bride, Zhu Mojin, underwent an equally drastic transformation. The polite, straightforward woman he had met vanished. She became incredibly lazy, outright refusing to perform any basic household chores, and directed constant, vicious anger toward her husband, regardless of his flawless obedience. When she lost her temper, she spared no one. She screamed at her husband, loudly insulted her in-laws, and gossiped maliciously about the Lee family to anyone in the village who would listen. Lee Duan possessed a high threshold for suffering and initially absorbed his wife's emotional abuse without complaint. However, his breaking point was his deep devotion to his parents. When Zhu Mujin began publicly humiliating them, he finally stood his ground, demanding she show them basic human decency. His pleas fell on deaf ears. Despite living less than a mile apart, Zhu Mujin only visited her husband's family home twice during their first year of marriage. Her behavior during these visits was extraordinarily cruel. Before even stepping through their front door, she would theatrically pinch her nose, loudly complaining that the house reeked of poverty. She spoke to his elderly parents with overwhelming disrespect, addressing them as if they were uneducated vagrants. She outright refused to sit on their wooden chairs, claiming the furniture would ruin her expensive clothing. When his mother offered her a humble, home-cooked meal, Zhu Mujin sneered in disgust. She looked at the meager spread and loudly mocked them, asking how human beings could stomach scraps that her own family would only feed to livestock. She looked around their decaying, drafty home and openly expressed her revulsion at their living conditions. Turning her venom toward her husband, she called him a pathetic excuse for a man. She berated him for having a strong body but being utterly useless, shaming him for failing to provide a luxurious life for his aging parents while he wasted away in the mud. Hearing his wife viciously humiliate his gentle parents pushed Lee Duan to the edge. Trembling with rage, he stood up, fully intending to strike her across the face. But his parents immediately intervened, physically holding him back. They begged him to maintain his composure, reminding him that a married couple must resolve their conflicts with patience, not violence. Acutely aware of their low social standing, the elderly couple swallowed their pride and did not argue with their haughty daughter-in-law, quietly hoping she would eventually soften her heart. The disparity in their relationship became painfully obvious when Lee Duan's father fell severely ill and had to be hospitalized. Desperate for funds to cover the mounting medical bills, the young man begged his wealthy wife and father-in-law for a loan. They coldly refused. It took hours of humiliating pleading before they finally agreed to advance him 5,000 yuan, which was equivalent to roughly $1,700. However, they made it explicitly clear that this was not a family favor. It was an advance on his unpaid labor, binding him even tighter to their estate. During the entire first year of their marriage, Zhu Mojin permitted her husband to sleep in the marital bed exactly once, and that was strictly on their wedding night. For the remainder of the year, Lee Duan was banished to a cold, dusty storage room at the back of the property. He was expressly forbidden from initiating any physical contact with his wife unless she granted him explicit permission, an event that never occurred. The simmering tension between the couple reached a boiling point one evening when Zhu Mujin attended a local celebration with her friends. She consumed so much alcohol that she became entirely incapacitated and could not stand on her own. Lee Duan drove into town to pick her up and carry her back to the estate. Starved for affection and deeply frustrated by his forced celibacy, he took advantage of her heavily intoxicated state and forced himself on her in the dark. When the morning came and Zhu Mujin sobered up, she realized what had transpired, and her fury was absolutely volcanic. She screamed at him with venomous hatred, calling him a filthy, foul-smelling animal who was beneath her contempt. She then established an ironclad rule, forbidding him from ever touching her again under any circumstances. From Lee Duan's perspective, her reaction was entirely unreasonable. He could not fathom a traditional marriage where a husband was permanently locked out of his own wife's bedroom. He attempted to reason with her calmly, hoping to bridge the massive divide between them, but she maintained an icy distance, treating him more like an infected stray dog than a life partner. Slowly, the agonizing reality of his situation crystallized in Lee Duan's mind. He realized with absolute certainty that he had no standing whatsoever within the Zhu household. They did not view him as a member of the family, nor even as a fellow human being. To the wealthy patriarch and his spoiled daughters, Lee Duan was merely a beast of burden, a piece of biological farm machinery meant to be exploited until it broke down completely. He poured every ounce of his energy and sweat into their massive agricultural estate, yet his only compensation was relentless emotional and physical torment. Thoughts of walking away and filing for divorce began to circle endlessly in his mind, offering a faint glimmer of hope in the darkness. However, the crushing reality of his financial situation firmly anchored him to his daily misery. He was still drowning in the medical debt he owed his wealthy father-in-law for his own father's hospital bills. He knew with absolute certainty that leaving the marriage would force that massive financial burden directly back onto his fragile, aging parents. He absolutely refused to cause them any more anxiety or ruin them financially. Trapped by a deep sense of filial duty and a staggering lack of alternative options, Lee Duan chose the only path he felt was truly available to him. He decided to grit his teeth, bury his mounting resentment deep inside his chest, and endure the endless suffering until he physically could not take another step. Despite the suffocating daily oppression, Lee Duan continued to play the role of the quiet, dutiful son-in-law. Whenever Zhu Zhencheng issued a command, no matter how grueling, dangerous, or demeaning the task was, Lee Duan completed the work flawlessly and without uttering a single word of complaint. Unfortunately, his stoic obedience earned him absolutely zero respect. Instead, it served as a flashing signal to the rest of the family that he was a safe target for their own frustrations. Soon, every single member of the Zhu household eagerly joined in the daily humiliation rituals. His sister-in-law, Zhu Chengshu, proved to be particularly vicious. She frequently echoed her younger sister's cruel insults, actively participating in public screaming matches designed to completely emasculate Lee Duan in front of the hired farmhands and visiting neighbors. His internal strategy of endless patience and silent endurance completely backfired. Rather than softening the wealthy family's inherent cruelty, his quiet submission only emboldened them to push the boundaries of their psychological abuse even further. The patriarch, Zhu Jincheng, was a fiercely aggressive and highly dictatorial man who ruled his sprawling rural estate with an iron fist. As the months wore on, his daily verbal abuse toward his trapped son-in-law escalated into severe physical violence. If Lee Duan hesitated for even a fraction of a second, or if a difficult chore was not completed to the older man's wildly impossible standards, Zhu Jincheng would grab a heavy wooden club. He would then brutally beat the young man. This did not happen behind closed doors. The patriarch would actively chase his son-in-law through the open courtyard, striking him repeatedly across the back and shoulders in full view of the entire village. Every survival instinct in Lee Duan's powerful, muscular body screamed at him to fight back, knowing he could easily overpower the older, smaller man in a matter of seconds. But the deeply ingrained cultural mandate to respect one's elders, no matter how abusive they were, held his fists firmly at his sides. He absorbed the agonizing blows, repeatedly telling himself it was simply the terrible price of his family's survival. Word of the severe, public mistreatment eventually reached Lee Duan's parents in their neighboring village. Their hearts broke completely for their eldest son, but they were paralyzed by the severe societal stigma surrounding failed marriages. They desperately tried to pacify him, arguing that finding a bride in their deeply impoverished state had been a rare miracle, and warning him that a divorced man with zero financial assets would face an even bleaker, lonelier future. One humid afternoon, after suffering an exceptionally brutal and humiliating beating from his father-in-law over a minor misunderstanding, Lee Duan finally snapped. He sprinted away from the sprawling estate, running relentlessly all the way back to his parents' humble dirt floor home, adamantly declaring through tears of rage that he was leaving his cruel wife for good. Terrified of the massive social fallout and the guaranteed financial wrath of the powerful Zhu family, his parents tearfully blocked his path out the door. In a heartbreaking display of ultimate submission, they physically dragged their heavily battered son all the way back to the Zhu compound, forcing the young man to kneel in the dirt courtyard and loudly beg for his father-in-law's forgiveness. This desperate act of appeasement proved to be a catastrophic mistake. It inflated Zhu Jincheng's massive ego to highly dangerous levels. Believing he now completely owned not just his son-in-law, but the entire Lee family, the arrogant patriarch issued an unthinkable new demand. He ordered Lee Duan to force his elderly parents into signing over their small family farm and their modest home to the Zhu estate by the start of the following year. This crossed a sacred line that Lee Duan absolutely could not ignore. Taking their tiny plot of land meant rendering his sick parents and his vulnerable younger siblings completely homeless and destitute. The smoldering resentment that had been building inside Lee Duan for over a year instantly ignited into pure, unadulterated rage. He flatly refused the demand, standing tall, looking his father-in-law dead in the eye, and stating with terrifying calmness that while he would accept any abuse directed at himself, he would completely destroy anyone who tried to harm his family. The sheer, unblinking intensity of his threat, combined with the quiet murmurs of heavy disapproval from several eavesdropping neighbors, forced Zhu Jincheng to immediately back down and drop the demand to save his own public face. Lee Duan quietly returned to the muddy fields, his shattered mind now fixed on a single, desperate goal. He would work like a machine until the family debt was fully paid, and then he would walk away from the nightmare forever. But the psychological damage was already permanent. On the morning of April 4th, 2001, Lee Duan woke up long before dawn. True to his word, He walked over to his biological parents' small farm to help with their agricultural chores. Because the elderly couple was asleep, he stopped by a neighbor's house to borrow a large farming machete. He labored intensely in the muddy fields for hours, completely losing track of time. He pushed himself relentlessly, skipping his midday meal, planning to eat a large lunch when he returned to the zoo estate. By the time the sun began to dip into the afternoon sky around 2 o'clock, Lee Duan was violently hungry. With his stomach painfully empty, he trudged back to the sprawling Zhu compound. In his mind, he was so ravenous that even a bowl of cold, leftover rice would taste like an absolute feast. He hurried straight into the kitchen, expecting to find a portion of the midday meal set aside for him. Instead, the heavy iron pots were empty. Not a single scrap of food had been saved. However, as he glanced toward the animal pens, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Sitting next to the doghouse was a large ceramic bowl piled high with fresh white rice, meat, bones, and a perfectly intact cooked fish. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The Zhu family had deliberately scraped every last piece of edible food into the dog's bowl, intentionally leaving nothing for him. Lee Duan stood frozen in the kitchen, overwhelmed by a suffocating wave of anger. The message was unmistakable. In the eyes of his wealthy in-laws, he was quite literally worth less than the family dog. Despite the crushing humiliation, his sheer exhaustion temporarily outweighed his rage. He decided not to start a screaming match. Instead, he quietly pulled out a cheap package of instant noodles, hoping to quickly boil some water. Just as he tore open the wrapper, the eldest daughter, Zhu Changshu, stormed into the kitchen. Without warning, she violently snatched the dry noodles out of his hands. She glared at him with pure disgust and began viciously berating him. She screamed that he only cared about doing heavy labor for his impoverished parents. She maliciously declared that since he refused to serve their family with unwavering devotion that day, he had permanently lost his right to consume their food. If he wanted to eat, she mocked, he could crawl out into the dirt street and buy it himself. The piercing screams of the eldest daughter immediately drew the attention of the patriarch. Zhu Jincheng marched into the kitchen, his face flushed with explosive anger, and instantly sided with his daughter. He began hurling vile insults at his son-in-law, accusing him of being a parasitic leech. But Zhu Jincheng did not stop at mere verbal abuse. In a terrifying escalation, the older man grabbed a sharp kitchen knife and pointed the steel blade directly at Lee Duan's chest, backing the younger man into a corner. As he wielded the blade, the arrogant patriarch launched into a horrific, profane tirade, viciously cursing Lee Duan and screaming obscenities about his struggling parents. For Lee Duan, shivering from exhaustion, hollowed out by starvation, and cornered by a drawn blade, the psychological dam finally broke. Years of silently swallowing physical beatings and endless public humiliation instantly crystallized into a blinding, murderous rage. He did not say a single word. He simply turned around, his face completely devoid of emotion, and walked out into the main living room. He calmly picked up the heavy wooden club that his father-in-law had repeatedly used to beat him in the past. His thick hands gripping the heavy wood, Lee Duan silently slipped back into the kitchen. He approached the screaming patriarch from behind and swung the club with every ounce of his massive strength, smashing it into Zhu Jincheng's skull. The older man collapsed instantly, blood pouring over his face, and scrambled desperately toward the outdoor courtyard. Lee Duan casually pursued him, continuing the brutal assault. Hearing the violent commotion, Zhu Jincheng's wife, Li Zilian, rushed out of the main house. Seeing her husband being violently bludgeoned, she desperately tried to intervene. But Lee Duan was completely lost to the violence. He dropped the blood-soaked wooden club and grabbed the heavy, razor-sharp farming machete he had borrowed from his neighbor. Without a second of hesitation, he turned the massive blade on his mother-in-law, hacking into her with terrifying speed and ferocity until she fell. Leaving the two older victims bleeding out in the courtyard, Lee Duan charged back into the house. He spotted his sister-in-law, Zhu Chengshu, standing frozen in absolute terror. He lunged forward, swinging the heavy machete with devastating force, cutting her down until she collapsed motionless onto the hard floor. He briefly walked back out into the bright afternoon sun to inspect the courtyard. After confirming that both his father-in-law and mother-in-law were taking their final breaths, a cold emptiness washed over him. He calmly walked back into the kitchen, exchanged the machete for a lethal Tibetan-style hunting knife, and slowly made his way toward the upstairs bedroom. Stepping over the threshold of the upstairs bedroom, Lee Duan gripped the Tibetan hunting knife. The heavy iron blade dripped steadily onto the wooden floorboards. Inside the room, his wife, Zhu Mojin, was resting on the mattress with their 5-month-old daughter, Zhu Li, sleeping peacefully beside her. Hearing the heavy footsteps, Zhu Mujin looked up. Her eyes widened in absolute horror as she took in the sight of her husband. He was completely drenched in thick, dark crimson from the top of his head down to his heavy work boots. Panic rising in her throat, she shrieked, asking what he had done and demanding to know if he had just murdered her parents and her older sister. Lee Duan did not utter a single syllable in response. He simply stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, staring at her with eyes that had gone completely dead and cold. Despite the terrifying scene unfolding in front of her, Zhu Mojin could not suppress her deeply ingrained arrogance. Instead of begging for her life or attempting to de-escalate the situation, she erupted in a fit of rage. She screamed that he was a filthy animal, a disgusting beast who was not even human. Pointing a trembling finger at the door, she ordered him to get out of her sight immediately, loudly declaring that a pathetic creature like him did not deserve to be her husband and certainly did not deserve to be the father of her child. As she spat the venomous words and attempted to sit up on the bed, whatever tiny fraction of restraint Lee Duan had left instantly evaporated. He lunged across the room, using his massive physical weight to forcefully pin his struggling wife flat against the mattress. Raising the heavy hunting blade high into the air, he brought it down viciously onto her skull. Zhu Mojin thrashed and fought back desperately, but her resistance only fueled his blinding, uncontrollable fury. After striking her 3 separate times, he realized she was still breathing. The sight of her open mouth, the very same mouth that had spent the last year relentlessly hurling unspeakable insults at his beloved parents, sent him over the edge. He focused his frenzied attack directly on her face, slashing repeatedly in a chaotic blur of absolute rage until she finally stopped moving. Tragically, in his blind, homicidal frenzy, Lee Duan completely lost all spatial awareness. As he wildly swung the heavy blade down upon his wife, he failed to notice their 5-month-old infant daughter lying dangerously close. The razor-sharp edge of the weapon caught the innocent baby directly across the throat. By the time he finally paused his attack and realized what he had done, it was entirely too late. The tiny child had already stopped breathing, becoming collateral damage in his explosion of lifelong vengeance. The bloodbath was still not over. Moving through the silent house like a grim reaper, the coal miner turned mass murderer stepped into the adjacent bedroom. There, he found his 5-year-old nephew, Liu Anwei, the young son of his deceased sister-in-law. The innocent boy could not escape the razor-sharp blade. With a single, brutal slash to the throat, the child's life was extinguished, bringing the total number of victims inside the house to 6. His horrific mission finally complete, Lee Duan slowly walked back downstairs and out into the bright afternoon sunlight. The rural courtyard was deathly quiet, save for the buzzing of flies gathering around the thick pools of blood. As he prepared to flee the property, his eyes fell upon the lifeless body of his father-in-law, Zhu Jincheng. Even in death, the sight of the tyrannical patriarch's face ignited a fresh, terrifying wave of boiling hatred inside Lee Duan. Spotting the massive, heavy iron grass guillotine sitting nearby, he dragged the older man's bleeding body over to the farming implement. Methodically, he positioned Zhu Jincheng's neck directly beneath the heavy blade and brought it down with crushing force, completely decapitating the man who had tormented him for so long. Leaving the gruesome scene behind, Lee Duan vanished into the dense mountain wilderness, initiating the massive, 3-month-long manhunt that would eventually end with his capture inside the commercial transport truck. During his subsequent interrogation at the Yan City Police Headquarters, detectives were deeply unsettled by his chilling demeanor. Sitting in the cold interrogation room, Lee Duan spoke in a clear, unwavering voice. He calmly explained to the recording devices that he had silently endured the hopelessly stubborn and vicious nature of every single adult in the Zhu family for far too long. He stated plainly that once a human being is pushed past their absolute breaking point, an explosion is inevitable. If it had not happened on that specific afternoon, he reasoned, it would have undoubtedly happened at some point in the near future. When the lead detective leaned across the steel table and asked if he felt any remorse, Lee Duan's answer sent shivers down their spines. He flatly stated that he did not regret killing the adults at all. The only shred of remorse he harbored was for the accidental death of his infant daughter. He expressed profound sorrow for her loss, acknowledging that the toxic feud belonged entirely to the adults and the child was completely innocent. To the seasoned investigators watching from the corners of the room, his body language was terrifyingly relaxed. It appeared as though massacring an entire family was of no real consequence to him. In fact, he seemed almost physically lighter, as if the horrific act of mass murder had finally lifted a massive, suffocating weight of lifelong resentment firmly off his broad shoulders. On October 19, 2001, the Intermediate People's Court of Yan City in Sichuan Province officially opened the first instance trial for the massacre that had completely horrified the rural community. The courtroom was packed to absolute capacity, with journalists, local villagers, and legal professionals, all eager to see the man who had single-handedly slaughtered an entire wealthy family. Security was incredibly tight as Lee Duan was led into the room in heavy iron shackles. Despite facing charges for 6 counts of intentional homicide, his expression remained perfectly stoic. He did not look like a bloodthirsty monster to the shocked onlookers. He simply looked like a deeply exhausted coal miner who had fully accepted his grim fate. During the intense legal proceedings, the prosecution laid out the horrific, undeniable facts of that bloody April afternoon. They detailed the brutal sequence of events, highlighting the merciless nature of the killings and aggressively demanding the ultimate punishment for the defendant. However, the defense attorney appointed to represent Lee Duan presented a highly compelling psychological counterargument. The lawyer did not attempt to deny his client's guilt, as the physical evidence and the full confession were absolutely airtight. Instead, the defense focused entirely on the extreme, prolonged psychological and physical torture that Lee Duan had endured during his miserable time at the Zhu estate. The defense painted a vivid picture of a deeply honorable, hardworking young man who was trapped in an impossible situation. The attorney meticulously detailed how the wealthy family had systemically stripped the man of his fundamental human dignity. They presented testimonies regarding the severe public beatings, the financial extortion, the forced starvation, and the relentless verbal humiliation directed not only at Lee Duan, but at his impoverished, highly vulnerable parents. The defense argued that Lee Duan was not inherently evil, but rather a tragic victim of extreme, circumstantial pressure. The lawyer pleaded with the judges to consider the years of horrific abuse as a significant mitigating factor, arguing that the brutal killings were not a calculated plot of cold-blooded malice, but rather the catastrophic explosion of a human mind pushed far beyond its natural biological breaking point. Despite his lawyer's passionate defense, Lee Duan himself showed absolutely zero interest in fighting for his own life. When given the opportunity to speak directly to the panel of judges, He stood tall and spoke with a calm, unwavering voice. He explicitly stated that he was not afraid of receiving the death penalty and that he felt the ultimate punishment was completely fair for the innocent lives he had taken. He announced to the silent courtroom that he would absolutely refuse to file any legal appeals to prolong his life. The only moment his iron composure finally cracked was when he spoke about his elderly parents. Tears formed in his dark eyes as he expressed his deepest, most agonizing regret. He knew that his horrific actions would permanently stain his family's honor, leaving his aging mother and father to suffer the endless, cruel whispers of their neighbors for the rest of their natural lives. Sitting in the public gallery, his parents wept uncontrollably, their hearts shattered completely, not because they condoned his terrible crimes, but because they intimately understood the absolute hell he had endured to protect them. The judicial panel carefully deliberated the facts of the case. While they acknowledged the severe abuse the defendant had suffered, the sheer scale and unimaginable brutality of the massacre, particularly the tragic murder of an innocent 5-month-old baby, made legal leniency entirely impossible. The judge officially sentenced Lee Duan to death for the crime of intentional homicide. Several months later, in May of 2002, the final sentence was officially carried out. Lee Duan was transported to the provincial execution grounds and placed before a firing squad. As the sharp crack of the rifles echoed through the morning air, the reaction from the large crowd of onlookers was incredibly surreal. Some people clapped their hands and cheered loudly, believing that ultimate justice had finally been served for a ruthless mass murderer. Others, however, wept openly, mourning the tragic end of a gentle young man who had been thoroughly destroyed by aristocratic cruelty. The devastating case sent massive shockwaves throughout the entire nation in 2001, sparking fierce, highly polarized debates in national newspapers and rural farming communities alike. Many citizens expressed profound outrage, firmly condemning Lee Duan as a remorseless psychopath who entirely deserved his violent end. However, a massive portion of the public expressed deep, vocal sympathy for the killer. They viewed the unprecedented tragedy as a stark, terrifying warning about the dangers of extreme wealth inequality and systemic domestic abuse. Sociologists and social commentators pointed out the deeply flawed, outdated cultural traditions surrounding the matrilocal marriage system in rural China. By moving into his wife's home and becoming a live-in son-in-law, a traditional man completely forfeited his social standing and surrendered his personal independence. Modern legal observers and true crime enthusiasts often wonder why Lee Duan did not simply file for divorce and walk away from the waking nightmare. But in the rigid, deeply traditional society of a remote mountain farming village at the turn of the century, a formal divorce carried a massive, permanent social stigma that could completely ruin an entire family for multiple generations. Furthermore, the massive financial debts maliciously forced upon him by his greedy father-in-law acted as an invisible, inescapable prison. Trapped by heavy cultural expectations, crippling rural poverty, and an aggressively abusive household, Lee Duan truly felt he had absolutely nowhere to run. The psychological pressure cooker eventually exploded, unleashing a terrifying flood of unadulterated violence that wiped out 7 human lives and left a permanent, bloody scar on the history of Sichuan province. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into one of the most tragic and complex cases in modern history. If you found this investigation compelling, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more true crime documentaries. We want to hear your thoughts on this heartbreaking story. Do you think the constant, severe abuse Lee Duan suffered should have saved him from the death penalty? Or did the brutal nature of his crimes demand the ultimate punishment? Let us know in the comments below.